In the cold October of 1884, a widow of 26 named Hannah Coyle stepped down off a mud-caked freight wagon into the cattle town of Bitterroot Flats, Montana, carrying one trunk, one carpet bag, and a lidded clay crock that she would not let the driver set down hard. And before her boots had crossed the mercantile porch, the women of that town already had a name for her. And they laughed about the mail-order widow who crossed 1,000 miles to marry a housekeeping post and brought a jar of sour gray paste instead of linens or silver. They called her the Sourdough Bride. They would go on laughing at her for the better part of a wet, rotting winter. Right up until the morning, every sack of flour in the valley turned to poison in the sacks, and the only living leaven for 40 miles was the thing she guarded against her chest. She had not lost her wits. She was keeping a promise made in a dead woman's kitchen that not one soul in Bitterroot Flats had the patience to understand. Look at her, standing there in the wind. She was lean and long in the back, with flour-scarred knuckles gone shiny from 30 years of scald and wash, and a mended gray traveling dress that had been turned twice at the cuffs. Her boots were a man's boots, cut down. She wore no ring, only a pale band where one had been. And she held that clay crock as a mother holds a sleeping child against a cold wind, one hand under it, one hand curved over the lid, her chin tucked down to shield it. A woman at the rail leaned to the woman beside her and did not trouble to lower her voice. That is her? The Rourke woman? That is the one. Come all this distance to keep his house. And what has she got in the pot? Preserves? Paste, the first woman said. Sour paste. I heard it from the driver. She fed it more careful than she fed herself the whole way up from the railhead. They laughed then, easy and unkind, as well-fed people laugh at a thing they have already decided is foolish. Now everyone in that country knew how the arrangement was supposed to run. A man who had buried a wife and could not run a house alone sent away for a woman to keep his kitchen, and a woman who had buried a husband and had nowhere left to stand answered the letter. It was a trade, plain as a horse trade, and everyone knew the terms. A hired woman earned her keep with a hot stove and a clean floor and a full table. Everyone knew that. And everyone knew Elias Rourke, the weathered widower who ran cattle on the benchland north of the creek, had sent for competent hands after he laid his first wife in the ground. Not for a widow who cradled a crock of gray paste like it was scripture off the altar. If you have ever carried the one thing your mother left you across a whole country that told you it was worthless, then you already understand Hannah Coyle, and I am asking you to stay with her, because what the women on that porch were laughing at was alive. The crock held 11 her mother had kept living through 30 winters and one famine year in the old country. A thing fed by hand every single dawn, a thing that does what dead store yeast and spoiled flour cannot do, though not one person in Bitterroot Flats yet knew why that would come to matter more than gold. Elias met the wagon himself. He was a tall man gone spare with grief and work, dark-hatted, with a face that had forgotten how to change. His eyes went to the trunk, then to the carpet-bag. Then they came to rest on the crock in her arms, and something in his jaw set hard. That all your goods? That is all, Hannah said. A woman comes to keep a kitchen and brings no linens. I brought my hands, she said. The linens I can sew. This I cannot make again if I let it die. And what is it? Leaven, she said. My mother's. She kept it alive 30 years. I mean to keep it alive, too. He studied that crock as a man studies a debt. I sent for a cook, he said. Not for a woman with a pet in a pot. You will have your cook, Hannah told him, level and quiet. You will also have this. The one does not cost you the other. He did not answer. He hitched the trunk up onto his shoulder and started for the wagon, and she followed with the crock. And the women on the porch watched them go and had their name for her the whole road home. Her mother's kitchen, in the country Hannah came from, had smelled of wood smoke and yeast and river water from the first dawn Hannah could remember. Every morning before the light, her mother had gone to the crock in the cold corner, poured off a measure, and fed it fresh meal and clean water, murmuring to it in the old tongue as if it could hear. A living thing must be fed, her mother said, or it dies. And if it dies, you cannot buy another, for it is not a thing that is sold. Hannah had watched a famine come through that valley when she was a girl, watched the mills go quiet and the good flour rot in a wet ear and the dead yeast bread turn to brick. And she had watched her mother feed a whole lane of neighbors from bread raised on that same sour crock, bread that rose when nothing else would rise, bread that could be made from grain gone half to ruin and still not sicken a soul. That was a thing not one person in Montana understood yet. A true wild leaven is not a convenience. In a bad year, it is the difference between a fed camp and a buried one. So each dawn on the Rourke place, before she blacked the stove or drew the water, Hannah went to the cold corner of the pantry and fed her crock. Elias watched her do it the first 3 mornings with his coffee going cold in his hand. You feed that thing before you feed the men, he said finally. I feed it before I feed anyone, she said. It cannot feed itself. You can. It is meal you are pouring off, meal I paid for. A spoonful, she said, and in a hard year that spoonful will feed this whole bench. You do not believe me. You do not have to. You only have to let me keep her fed. Her, he repeated. Flat, her, Hannah said. And she covered the crock and went to the stove, and by the time the men came in there was hot bread and side meat and coffee on the table, and Elias ate it in silence and could find no fault in it, which seemed to trouble him more than fault would have. She kept his house better than it had been kept in a year. That was plain to the hands, plain to anyone who came by. But Elias Rourke had built a wall in himself the day he filled in his first wife's grave, and he kept Hannah on the far side of it, correct and cold. He let her cook. He would not let her matter. He paid her at the month's end in coin counted into her palm without his eyes meeting hers, and he called her nothing. Not by her given name, not once. All that long autumn. The town's loudest mouth belonged to a prosperous storekeeper named Del Yarrow, who ran the mercantile and had been circling the Rourke water rights and the Rourke grazing for 2 full years. Patient as a hawk on a fence post, Yarrow had made the sourdough bride his favorite joke. When Elias came in for nails or coffee or wire, Yarrow would lean on the counter with a wide store-bought smile. How is the paste, Rourke? Rising well? It is 11, Elias said. It rises bread. 11. Yarrow laughed for the benefit of the men by the stove. You paid a fare from the railhead to bring a jar of sour mud into this valley. My shelves are stacked to the roof with good white flour and packet yeast in tins that never spoil, never need feeding, never need talking to. You could bake this whole town on what I have got in back. What is a crock of gray slop against that? You are a man who has never seen a bad year. Elias said, I have seen plenty, and in every one of them a tin of yeast on my shelf beat a widow's pot of paste. Then you have been lucky, and you have mistaken luck for sense. Yarrow spread his hands to his crowded shelves. "Look around you, Rourke. Does this look like a man who trades in luck? I will sell your sourdough bride a sack of proper flour whenever her jar of mud disappoints her. Tell her I said so." "I did not buy her for the crock," Elias said, and then looked as though the word her had gotten away from him, and paid for his wire and left. Behind Yarrow, always, was his wife, a soft-spoken woman who saw more than she said. When his laughter ran too long, she would touch his sleeve and murmur only his name, low, as you would speak to a dog that had begun to worry a thing it should leave alone. "Still, I am only having my fun. You are having it on a widow who never did you a wrong." Dell. He would wave her off. But she watched Hannah when Hannah came to trade eggs for salt, watched the careful way she carried that crock even to town, and something in the storekeeper's wife was not laughing. Then the rain came, and it did not stop. It rained through the back half of October and into November, a cold, seeping rain that never quite became snow, that soaked the stacked hay and found the seams of every roof and got down into the grain. Hannah smelled it before anyone would hear her say it. She went to the flour barrel in the Rourke pantry one gray morning, lifted the lid, and bent her face to it and straightened with her mouth gone thin. "This flour is turning," she told Elias. "Damp got to the sacks. It will sour, and then it will not be safe." "Flour does not go bad," he said. "It is flour. In a wet year it does. It molds in the sack, and it makes a man sick, and packet yeast will not raise it once it turns. The yeast dies in the sour, and the bread will not lift, and what does lift can poison you." She set her jaw. "Mine will raise it. A true leaven eats the sour. It is the only thing that will make that grain safe to eat. Tell the men, tell the town." He looked at her a long moment. "You want me to walk into Yarrow's store and tell the valley their flour is poison and your pot of paste is the cure? Yes, they will laugh me off the bench. Then let them laugh," Hannah said. "I would rather be laughed at than watch a man die of bread I could have raised." He did not tell the town. He was not yet ready to stand where she was standing. The fall resupply wagon, the last one before the passes closed, broke its rear axle at the ford below the Yarrow place. And while it sat there, the creek came up in the night from all that rain and took the crossing out, and the road washed clean away to bare rock and running water. There would be no more freight into Bitterroot Flats until spring thaw. And in every larder in the valley, in every barrel and bin and sack, the flour that had gotten wet in October began, quietly, in the dark, to turn. Hannah tried once more, on her own, without Elias. She went to the women at the church cellar where the town's common stores were kept, and she brought a bowl of her own risen sponge to show them, alive and breathing and sweet sour and good. "I can save the sour grain," she told them. "All of it. You feed a little of this into it, and it eats what is spoiled, and it raises safe bread. My mother fed a whole lane through a famine on no more than this. Let me show you. Let me teach it to you before it is needed." The women stared down at the bowl. They took in her cut-down man's boots and her twice-turned dress. And the eldest of them, a broad, hard woman with the town at her back, spoke for all of them. "We have flour, Mrs. Coyle. We have good white flour and yeast in tins that Mr. Yarrow sells by the door. We do not need a widow's crock of spoil to teach us our own kitchens." She pushed the bowl back across the board. "Go home and keep the man's house you were bought to keep." They turned her out into the rain with her sponge going cold in her hands. That was the night Hannah Coyle came the closest she ever came to quitting. She sat at the Rourke kitchen table by a single candle with her mother's crock in front of her and the writing paper beside it. And she began a letter home asking whether there was passage money to be had anywhere from anyone to carry her back the 1,000 miles she had come. She got as far as the date. Then she set down the pen. She looked at the crock a long time, and instead of finishing the letter she rose, and she poured off a measure, and she fed it, fresh meal, clean water. The old murmur under her breath, in the old tongue, one more time by candlelight, choosing the thing her mother left her over the easy road out. She did not know Elias stood in the dark doorway and watched her do it. She did not know he had watched her fold the unfinished letter and put it away. He said nothing. But he did not sleep that night, and in the morning his eyes found hers across the coffee for the first time since she came. The first true blizzard came down out of the north 2 days later and shut the valley like a hand closing. It snowed for 3 days without stopping, and when it broke the world was white to the fence tops, and the cold had teeth, and every family in Bitterroot Flats went to its flour barrel for the winter's bread. And every barrel had turned. The wet October had done its work in the dark. The flour was soured and gone gray-green in the sacks, clotted and rank. And the packet yeast off Yarrow's shelves would not raise it. The tins were good, but the grain was dead sour. And what dough the women forced up in desperation baked into heavy, bitter, sickening loaves. The first to fall ill was one of the Rourke hands, a young rider who had eaten bread baked from a soured sack in the bunkhouse before Hannah caught it. He went down with cramps and fever and a gray sweat, and the others stood around his bunk not knowing what to do, and the wagon road was gone, and the nearest doctor was a frozen day's ride the wrong side of a washed-out ford. "It is the bread," one of the older hands said, low, to Elias in the doorway. "Same as took the 2 boys down at the South Settlement, they say. There is no doctor coming, and there is no bread that will not do the same to the rest of us." "There is one," Elias said. "You mean the widow's pot." "I mean the widow's pot." The old hand looked at his sick partner and then at his own hard hands. "A month ago I would have laughed you out of the bunkhouse for saying it." "A month ago," Elias said, "so would I." Hannah did not wait to be asked. She put on Elias's second coat over her turned dress, and she took up her mother's crock, and she walked out through the drifts to the bunkhouse in the blue cold. She set her sponge that night at the bunkhouse stove, and she fed it, and she sat up with it while the young hand shook under his blankets, and she made him take nothing but broth and clean water, and would not let another crumb of the soured bread past his lips. And by the gray of the next morning there was bread rising in that bunkhouse, real bread, live leavened, lifting sweet and high off the soured grain that her crock had eaten clean, filling the whole snowbound room with a smell that made hard men go quiet. The young rider ate that bread and kept it down, and by evening his fever had broken. Word of it went out across the snow as only certain kinds of word travel in a shut-in valley. The Rourke place has bread, live bread, off the same spoiled grain that is poisoning everyone else, raised from the widow's crock. And one by one, then 2 by 2, the sledges began to come. They came down off the far benches and up from the creek homesteads, families on runnered sledges with their soured sacks roped in back, coming to the Rourke kitchen door where Hannah stood at a stove that never went cold. She took their spoiled grain, and she fed her leaven into it, and she raised it safe, and she sent them home with living bread and a fist of starter in a cup, and the plain instruction her mother had given her: feed it every dawn, keep it warm, keep it alive, and it will keep you. Del Hierro stood in his own useless mercantile through all of it. In a store stacked to the rafters with good white flour gone gray, in every sack and packet yeast that could not raise a bit of it, and he watched through his frosted window as sledge after sledge went past his door and up the bench to the Rourke place. He watched the whole valley walk past his stacked shelves to a widow's clay pot. And he did not laugh any more. He was not the one who crossed first. It is not the loud ones who cross first. It was his son. The boy came on the fourth morning, near grown, hat already in his two hands before Hannah opened the door, snow to his knees, and his face raw with cold and shame. "Mrs. Coyle," he said, and stopped and started again. "My father didn't send me. He doesn't know I'm here." "Come in out of the cold," Hannah said. "My mother is poorly on the bread," the boy said, still on the step. "The whole store is flour, and it is all turned, and she cannot lift a loaf that does not sicken her. And I heard, everyone heard, that you can teach it. The keeping of the crock. I came to ask if you would teach my mother, so she does not have to come and stand in your door and he could not finish it. So she does not have to be laughed at," Hannah said gently, as I was. The boy's ears went red. "Yes, ma'am." Hannah held the boy's eyes a long moment, this child of the man who had made her his winter joke. Then she stepped back and opened the door wide. "Bring your soured flour and a clean crock," she said. "Bring your mother when the drifts let her. I will teach you both. There is no charge on a thing that was given to me for nothing. Come in and get warm first." The boy came in. His mother came herself 2 days after, when the wind lay down, walking the last stretch through the drifts with her skirts held up, and she stood in the Rourke kitchen where the warm, sour, sweet smell of live bread had soaked into the very timbers, and she could not meet Hannah's eyes. "I stood by while my husband made a fool of you at his counter for 2 years, the storekeeper's wife said. "I said your name to him and nothing more. I should have said more. I was wrong." Her voice went unsteady. "I was wrong the whole 2 years, and half this valley was wrong with me, and now my boy eats your bread, and I have come to your door to beg the very thing we mocked. There is no smaller a person can be made." "You are not small," Hannah said. She took the woman's cold hands in her flour, scarred ones. "You came. That is the whole of it. Now watch me feed her, and then you will feed her, and by spring you will not remember you were ever afraid of a crock." And she taught her, dawn by dawn, the pouring off and the fresh meal and the clean water, until the storekeeper's wife could raise a loaf off soured grain with her own 2 hands and weep doing it. By the time the passes opened, there was living leaven in a dozen kitchens up and down Bitterroot Flats, all of it divided out from one clay crock. And when the first freight wagon of the spring finally forded the rebuilt crossing, the driver carried out with him a story that reached the territorial paper 2 counties over. The notice, when it was printed, did not name Hannah by name, for that was not how such things were printed then. It said only that in the hard winter just past, in a valley shut off by a washed road, not one soul had died of the spoiled flour sickness that had taken lives in 3 settlements to the south, and that the people there gave the credit to a widow's leaven, an old country wild yeast, kept alive by one woman's hand that had made safe the very grain that killed elsewhere. A circuit doctor riding through in April wrote much the same into his log. The widow's leaven, he called it. He did not know her name either. He wrote down what it did. Hannah never once stood in Yarrow's store and told the men what they could do with their tinned yeast. There is no such scene. She did not go to the church cellar and remind the women who had turned her out into the rain. The narrator will do that work. She would not. She only kept feeding her crock every dawn, as her mother had, and she kept dividing it out to any hand that asked. Now I will tell you the last of it, which is the part that matters most. On a bright, hard morning near the end of that winter, with the light coming clean and gold off the snow into the Rourke kitchen, Elias came in from the cold and stopped in the doorway. Hannah stood at the long table with her mother's crock open before her and a dozen small, clean crocks set out in a row, and she was dividing the living leaven out among them, a measure into each, murmuring the old words under her breath, one for each homestead that had asked, one starter apiece to carry a family through, so that if any single crock died in any single kitchen, the whole valley would not lose the thing again. Elias watched her a while. When he spoke, his voice was not the flat voice he had used all autumn. When I sent that letter to the railhead office, he said slowly, I asked for a woman who could keep a kitchen. Hannah did not look up from her work. You said so. Many times. I have been a fool since the wagon set you down. He turned his hat in his hands, just as his own enemy's son had turned a hat in this same kitchen. I let this whole valley laugh at the best thing that ever came up that road, and I stood at that counter and near enough laughed with them, because I was too proud to say out loud what I could see with my own eyes at my own table every morning of my life since October. Now she did look up. I do not want to pay you at the month's end any more, Aaliyah said. I do not want you on the far side of anything. I did not send for a cook. I only thought I did. He came a step into the room. I am not asking you to work for me, Hannah. I am asking you to stay, not as my help. As my wife, if a proud man who took a whole winter to see straight is worth the staying for. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a sledge runner creaked somewhere on the bench, another family coming for its starter. You called me by my name, Hannah said. That is the first time. It will not be the last, if you will let it not be. She looked at him a long moment, this weathered widower who had buried his pride harder than he had buried anyone. Then she reached to the row of small crocks on the table, and she chose one, and she pressed a measure of the living leaven down into it with her own hand, and she covered the lid, and she held it out to him across the table. Then take this, she said. It is the only dowry I ever had, and it is worth more than linens or silver, and it will outlive us both if it is fed. A woman keeps her mother's promise, Mr. Rourke. And a wife shares it. Her voice did not shake. Yes, I will stay. Feed it every dawn, and it will feed whatever comes. He took the crock in his two rough hands as carefully as she had carried it 1,000 miles, and he held it against his chest as she had held it in the wind on the day the town first laughed. And for the first time since he had filled in a grave, Elias Rourke's face changed. They were married when the dogwood came out along the creek, and there is a jar of that same living leaven, they say, in kitchens all up and down that bench in Montana to this very day, fed every dawn by hands that never knew the widow's name. Only that a mail-order bride once carried 1,000 miles the one thing the whole town told her was worthless, and that in the worst winter anyone there could remember, it was the only thing that kept them all alive. There is one of these stories in every county in this country. A woman comes with the one thing she was told to leave behind, and a hard year proves her right. And a proud man learns too late and just in time to say the word he should have said at the start. If you have ever carried something your mother left you, a recipe, a skill, a living thing kept alive by hand through hard years, across a distance and a doubt that told you to let it die, then this story was for you, and I would like to know it. Leave a comment and tell me the one thing from your own mother's kitchen you would carry 1,000 miles and never let a soul set down hard. And if you have made it this far into Hannah's Winter with me, then stay, subscribe, and settle in, and I will bring you the next one by the fire. Would you have finished that letter home and taken the easy road back, or would you have fed the crock one more dawn and stayed?